Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. In this lecture, I want to talk about the SWOT analysis. Now, in a previous lecture, we talked about business strategies, and one of the things we discussed is in order to figure out the very best business strategy to pursue, we first need to figure out the environment. We got to look at the industry, both internal and external factors, the competition, we got to look at what our customers want, and we need to understand what are our core competencies and what are the core competencies of our competition. Now, there's a myriad of ways by which we can do this. One is the SWOT analysis. Now, here's the thing about the SWOT analysis. It's actually pretty simple, right? I mean, you've seen these things. So you draw yourself your matrix. Okay, fantastic. I've got that up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out my strengths, my weaknesses, my opportunities, and my threats, bulleting each one of them, and bing, bang, boom, I'm done. I've got my SWOT analysis. No fuss, no muss. Couldn't be easier. Well, here's the problem. It's because a SWOT is so simple to understand that we often don't really give it the time or respect or investment of resources to do properly. Now, this is especially important when we think about the purpose of a SWOT. The SWOT determines the company's competitive position and figures out the best strategy to pursue, how best to win in the marketplace. So, yeah, if the SWOT is going to help us understand the best strategy to execute against, don't you think we would take the time to do this right? And so that's what I want to do today. I'm going to go over about 4 points or so that are really going to help us understand the finer nuances of a SWOT analysis. And this first point is this: strengths and weaknesses are internally focused. Now, let me show you what I mean by that. We have an internal environment, right? Things that we can, for the most part, control. We can control things like our vision and mission and our guiding principles, our organizational structure, core competencies, management and leadership practices, you name it. These are things that are part of our organization, part of our company, and over which we have a fairly high level of control. Okay, so they are internally focused. Now, a strength or a weakness is the presence or absence of a core competency, of something we can control. On that previous slide there, core competencies, where is it? Where is it? Right here, core competency. That's a blanket term for all of these things if we're really good at it. So if we have a core competency, an internal characteristic that gives us a competitive advantage in the marketplace, then that is a strength. On the other hand, if we are missing a core competency, something that we desperately need to be competitive, well, now it's a weakness. Okay, so let's think about some core competencies that we may in fact need to be successful. Competencies or know-how, the actual skills. How do you do this? How do you do that? Another one can be physical assets, the tools and equipment that we need to do what we do. Human assets, intellectual capital. Organizational assets, intangible assets. These are things like patents and so forth. Strategic alliances or cooperative partnerships, as well as supplier networks. These are all things that if we do them well, and they give us an edge, well, then it's a strength. But if we don't do them well and it's putting us at risk, then they're a weakness. Now, a note about resources, those physical resources, physical assets that I talked about. Actually, 4 notes about them. It's really easy to think of something as, oh, well, I have this cool thing, therefore I have a competitive advantage in the marketplace. No, in order for a physical asset to be a true competitive asset, it needs to meet 4 criteria. So let's talk about those. First, it has to be really, really difficult to obtain or copy. In order for it to be considered something that's really going to give you a competitive edge, it's got to be something that nobody else can get their hands on or copy, right? Another one is that it has staying power. Yes, it's going to be durable today and durable tomorrow. It's not something that, okay, it gives you an edge today, but next year there's going to be something else, and then what you have now is pretty much immaterial. It needs to be something that can really stick around and be an asset to you in the long term. Another one is that it truly does outclass other assets, other resources. So yeah, it's pretty darn cool and fantastic, but the competitors have this or this or this, and they pretty much do the same thing as this thing that we're talking about. So it's not really all that special. And then the fourth one is that it's something that cannot be easily replaced or substituted by a competitor, okay? If your physical assets meet those 4 criteria, then I would consider them a core competitive advantage. Okay, let's keep going. Point number 2, opportunities and threats are externally focused. Okay, so our strengths and weaknesses are internal to who we are, what we have, what we can do, what we can't do. On the other hand, opportunities and threats are external. Let me show you what I mean. External environmental factors exist outside of our control, but profoundly affect operations. So this can include things like competitors, supply chains, or the availability of supply chain networks, cost of materials, regulations, trade policies, media perception, customer preference. These are things that you can't control. They are outside of your sphere of control. They are external factors. Okay, so there's the definition of external. Now let's look at opportunities and threats. So an opportunity is an external environmental condition which the organization, by virtue of its strengths, is well poised to exploit. Okay, so for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Zoom was very well positioned to respond to this pandemic. The pandemic is an external force, right? But Zoom was in a position with its internal core competencies to respond to that opportunity. So everybody, when millions of people found themselves working from home and in need of a way to collaborate virtually in remote teams, that is an external condition that Zoom was able to exploit because of its internal strengths. Okay, let's keep going. What do opportunities look like? Presuming your strengths. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. Well, a prospect for profitable long-term growth, that looks like an opportunity. Possibility of gaining a competitive advantage. Prospect of closing or increasing a competitive gap, depending on where you are in that gap, right? Entering or expanding in a new or existing market. Lengthening a product's life cycle and reducing per unit cost and increasing economies of scale. These are all things that exist in the external world that we would like to pursue. Okay. Now, what about threats? Well, threats are external as well, and they are external conditions that highlight an organization's weaknesses, exposing a chink in the armor which competitors can then exploit, right? So for example, once again using Zoom, when Zoom came on, Zoom was not the only remote meeting platform available when COVID-19 hit. We had WebEx, we had Microsoft Meetings or Meeting Space or something like that. I use it all the time. I don't know why I can't remember it. and their Cisco had some options, big blue button, all that sort of stuff. Well, okay, so everybody could exploit the opportunity? No, not necessarily, because a lot of these other systems required users to open accounts or download software, things like that. Zoom did not require you to download software or open an account. The meeting organizer would just send out a link. The attendees would click on the link and bam, they're in, okay? So the threat of the external environment, which was customers wanting easy access to a meeting platform, that put at risk companies that could not meet that need. Therefore, it was a threat. Okay. What do threats look like? Well, they look just like opportunities, just from the perspective of the other side, right? Perspective of the competition. The purpose of identifying threats is so you can devise a strong mitigation or response strategy. You can't always remove a threat, but you can respond to it, you can mitigate for it, and if you're really on top of it, you can turn a threat into an opportunity by looking at the internal core competencies over which you do have control. You can make adjustments, you can evolve to turn a threat into an opportunity. Okay, point number 3 in a good SWOT analysis. Strengths allow us to pursue opportunities. All right, here's my posit for you. An opportunity does not exist outside of the context of your strength. For instance, the metaverse is big. It's going to be big. Over the next 10 years, the metaverse is going to be the new frontier of what online means, okay? Well, does that mean that I have the opportunity to kind of become the next big, massive tech multinational because the metaverse is going to be good? No, because I do not have the skills, experience, or resources necessary to pursue that opportunity. In other words, my lack of strengths in these areas as it pertains to the metaverse means it's not an opportunity for me. I really cannot view that as an opportunity. On the other hand, you know what? If somebody has really strong skills and experience, they can apply for a cool consulting opportunity. Skills and experience are internal strengths. The consulting gig in this example is the external opportunity. The external opportunity can only be defined as an opportunity if you have the strengths necessary to exploit it. Okay, that brings us to 4, and you probably could forecast this, right? Weaknesses give power to threats. Now, it's the opposite side of strengths to opportunities. Think of it this way. Someone with a weakened immune system is more susceptible to the threat of infection, right? Therefore, a deficient immune system is an internal weakness. A harmful infection is an external threat. Now, if your immune system is fine and there's a, illness out there, there's no threat. You're fine. You're immune. There's nothing to worry about. On the other hand, if you have a deficient immune system, all of a sudden that becomes a threat. So a threat does not exist unless your internal weaknesses give it power over you. Okay. Now, one last note, and actually it's 2 last notes, and that's in scoping our SWOT. Thing is, it's a big world out there. External environment, internal environment, so on and so forth. We need to really make sure that we stay focused on what matters. So, for example, I have this YouTube channel, right? I have a few YouTube channels. Well, hey, you know what? I'm a good juggler. I can juggle all right. That's a core competency. Well, it's not a core competency. It's a competency. I am a competent juggler. But is it a core competency to my YouTube channel and to my podcast? No. Just because I have the strength does not mean that that strength is germane to what we're trying to do at the company. Same thing goes with threats, right? And so forth. So for example, when my daughter was a teeny tiny little girl, she used to have a really tough time sleeping at night because she, somehow or another, got it into her head that North Korea was going to nuke us. Okay? So every night she would just be in terror of nuclear war with North Korea. Now, is there a threat? Was there a threat that North Korea would nuke us? I suppose so, sure, maybe. A threat so small that you probably don't even know. Well, not even probably. You don't have to worry about it. Furthermore, even despite the fact that it's so small, is there anything you can do to mitigate for it? I mean, other than build and live in a bunker? No. So it's a minuscule threat, and there's very little you can do to mitigate for it. So don't worry about it. All right? Don't build up strengths that aren't really strengths, and don't really build up threats or weaknesses that aren't really threats or weaknesses. But in the same way, don't gloss over what matters. Here's the thing. We love listing our strengths. Oh, we're so good, right? Okay. And it's really exciting to look at opportunities. That's exciting stuff. But oh my gosh, folks, we really like to ignore our weaknesses and we like to ignore the threats. Anything that tells us you're not going to succeed in this space, you are not going to be successful in competing, you are not going to be able to deliver what customers want, you don't have the skills, you have nothing but weaknesses, and the threats out there are just too much. We don't like to look at that. But here's the deal, all right? We are not looking at this to say no to our plan or no to our business or anything like that. We are looking at these things so that we can figure out where do we need to invest resources to get those weaknesses over on the strength side, those that really matter, and what do we need to do to mitigate these threats, or if we're really clever, figure out how to turn them into opportunities by reassessing our strengths and figuring out how we can meet these things in a money-making way. Okay? So make sure you dig through the painful stuff as well. All right, so there you go. You now have a competitive advantage because you know how to approach this in ways that other people don't. So go off, use it, and do something awesome. All right? Thanks a lot, and we'll talk again soon.